Marble Snap is currently suffering from one of the problems that plagues most collectible card games. Everyone's playing leader, it creates a negative gameplay experience. Cool. We nerf and we deal with leader. Everyone is worried and upset about Sabu and Silver Surfer that are dominating the ladder and creating a negative gameplay experience. Well, cool. We nerf those cards and we move on to everybody complaining once again about Shuri and Thanos and a number of other cards that will no doubt never end that are currently the best card in the game, and so something inevitably has to be done about those. To be clear, Marble Snap always needs to have a best card or best subsection of cards. That's how card games work after all. And today, we're not going to be looking at fundamental balance of a card necessarily in the sense of, yes, sometimes cards will be made, like Silver Surfer, that might just be a bit overtuned and a bit too powerful and will require some balance adjustments in time. But today, we're going to try and take a quick look at some of the mistakes that have been made by other card games that Marble Snap appears to be repeating, and look at some fundamentals of card balance, in my opinion, that might be causing some of these problems long term, in order to try and find a way to get to the end of this card is overpowered, please nerf Discord that we seem to have in Marble Snap right now. If you enjoy this type of video, please do let me know. It's something a bit different than our normal content here at Snapzone, so I would really appreciate your feedback on these thoughts, and more importantly actually, your opinion on this take and whether you agree or disagree, as long as we can keep that discussion healthy in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and like the video. You'll be doing me a favour in keeping this content ticking over. So first of all, I'm going to start with the quicker of my two big points. First of all, cost reduction is fundamentally going to cause balance issues when you introduce it into a card game. Let me elaborate on what I mean by this. When we look at cards, they are balanced on the amount of energy it costs to play them. In a game like Marble Snap, you can only play a card on a certain turn because of how much it costs. For example, we look at a card like White Queen. This card is very acceptable on turn number 4 because it's really strong and quite frankly has the ability to provide you with a good body in terms of stats, provide you with some card advantage in terms of more things to play, and that seems like a very acceptable effect to be playing on turn number 4. It seems significantly less fair to be playing that alongside something else on turn number 4 because of a card like Zabu. I do think cost reduction is acceptable in a certain amount, but it is always going to be the cause of certain problems in gameplay when cards are able to get on board way ahead of time. So what's acceptable in terms of cost reduction? Well, I think there's a few prohibiting factors we can put in place that give us an understanding of what's okay. If we look at a card like Psylocke or Electro, these are cards that accelerate us by 1 energy. It means we can get to a card 1 turn faster than we're supposed to, but in exchange for that, we have to play a understated card. Pay attention to that one, it will come back up later on. That's also in our deck, so we have to give up another deck slot that we have to draw ahead of time that we could be spending on a better, more powerful card, and that card is understated in order to provide us with that effect. That seems completely fine to me. Fundamentally, we're giving up quite a lot in terms of sacrifices to get to one of our good cards faster. That seems like great gameplay design. A card like Serra is a little bit more scary. We're offering cost reduction on every single thing that we have in our hand in terms of what we can play, and that can often allow us to play many things much cheaper than they would be able to. But in order to balance out an effect like this, we have a couple other factors in place. Cards have to cost a minimum of 1. This is a really important line that stops things getting too out of hand and allowing us to flood the board with massively reduced things if they've been reduced by multiple effects. That's a really big deal in my opinion and a great balancing tool for these type of effects. More importantly, Serra is a 5 cost card, meaning you will only ever get access to that effect for 1 turn of the game. We're playing Serra in order to accommodate it as opposed to another card in our deck, and Serra again is an undercosted card for its cost. 5 cost 4 power is not a good rate in terms of what you could be playing instead in order to access that effect. And I think that makes a card like Serra very acceptable. So what causes the issues with this effect? Well, let's look at pre-nerf Zabu. This is a card that was already good on rate. Its stats were pretty much in line with other cards that we already wanted to play. And more importantly, the reduction was not only a global one, but it was a global one of 2. Reducing cards by 2 allows them to be played much earlier than 1 turn earlier, like a card like Psylocke or Electro. So when playing Zabu, we didn't have to give up anything. We had a card that was good on rate, good on curve, cheap so that it came down early and we got that effect repeatedly, and it accelerated us by 2 energy, meaning that we could play 2 4-cost cards on turn 4, meaning we'd already gained 4 energy by the 3rd turn of the game. Well, the 4th turn of the game, sorry. That is a significant increase that has none of the downsides of these other cost reduction effects, making it fundamentally a problem. Then we can look at some of the other cards that many people cite to be an issue for Thanos Lockjaw right now, in the form of Quinjets and Lockjaw. Quinjet is a card that doesn't have that must cost a minimum of 1 line of text that Serra has. Again, it's good on rate, it has reasonable stats for its cost, it's cheap, so it comes down early and you could benefit from the effect for the entire game, and it does not stop cards from costing 0, meaning you have this inevitable flurry potential over the course of a game thanks to a card like Quinjet. Lockjaw is a little more difficult to break down, because fundamentally we aren't really cheating mana with Lockjaw in the traditional sense, but the card is designed in order to go from 3 on turn 3 playing Lockjaw into multiple 6-cost cards on turn number 4, which is certainly accelerating by more than 1 turn if Lockjaw is doing the thing it's supposed to do. Of course, when you pair this with a card like Quinjet and the Infinity Stones, it often means that you're actually pulling multiple 6-cost cards out of your deck on turn 3, something that many players, maybe rightfully so, think is a completely unacceptable balance rate. A card like Lockjaw is slightly understated for its cost, but it does give us a massive amount of acceleration we can benefit from multiple times in a game, especially when a card like the Space Stone exists, leading me to believe that this kind of effect is not acceptable in design either. So what should we be looking to put as rules in place for cards that costs reduce if these are things that we believe to be a problem? For me, they should be a selection of the following things. They need to either be massively understated if they're cheap and proactive. They need to have that minimum of 1 line of text that is attached to Serra to keep things from getting completely out of hand. And idealistically, you want most of your acceleration effects that reduce costs to reduce by 1, not so much 2. Because by the point we are kind of accelerating to 2 turns earlier, seems to be when we're finding cards to be very misbalanced because of how early they are ending up in play, when we're not paying their traditional energy cost. And hopefully that argument makes some kind of sense. The other take on this one is a bit more complicated, so bear with me while I break it down and we'll try and make sure that I'm clear and concise about how I feel about this one. Card games traditionally have 2 types of cards. We have what we'll call proactive cards and cards that are reactive. Proactive cards are going to be ones that you're happy to play out on curve, when you have the amount of energy required to play them, because they have good stats, they're going to help and get you ahead on board, and they have a kind of effect that is very proactive in your game plan. For example, let's look at a card like Ant-Man, for example. Ant-Man is a 1-cost card that we're always going to play basically whenever we have the ability to. We're very happy to play it on turn 1, its stats are okay for a 1-cost card, and we want it in play as early as we can to get its location full in order to get the maximum bonus of its effect. This can then also be applied to cards like Cosmo and Armor, and even effects like Red Skull if we talk about the higher end of the game. These are all cards that have reasonable bodies, you're more than happy to get their effects early and online as quickly as possible, or in Red Skull's case, they are a massive stat boost, and that tends to be a really big identifier of cards I would deem to be proactive. When the aim of the game is to win 2 locations based on how many stats you have at them, playing a card with exceptionally large stats means you are being proactive in how you want to play the game. This is in comparison to effects like Enchantress and Shang-Chi, cards that I would typically say are reactive cards. These are cards that we're never really going to want to play without an appropriate target for their effect. They're normally very understated in comparison to cards of their normal cost, but in exchange for that we gain a very powerful, potentially game-warping effect if we're able to get it off on a later turn and have it line up with the appropriate effect, most importantly, reacting to what our opponents are doing. And I think this is where some of the problem lies right now in Marvel Snap. The proactive cards are significantly better than the reactive ones. This normally isn't a massive issue. We're not talking about accessibility here. I'm sure we can do another video on that another time as to whether the fact Shuri and Thanos are so good and proactive but not so many players can get their hands on them. The issue here is that cards like Cosmo and Armor exist, which are proactive, reactive effects. Now, let me elaborate again on what I mean by this. Let's look at a sample turn to maybe break it down in a bit more detail. If you're playing Shuri 0 here, for example, you've played Shuri on turn number 4 and play your Red Skull. You're enacting your proactive game plan. You've got 30 points on your Red Skull, and you're looking to duplicate that with Taskmaster on the next turn to win yourself 2 lanes. Well, I'm a reactive player. I've chosen to play my reactive cards to play back against you, and I've got my Shang-Chi, so I can interfere with your game plan. I can take that Red Skull off the table with my reactive card. There's a small problem. You've already shut down my reactive card by playing Armor or playing Cosmo to protect it ahead of time so that I cannot react to the powerful proactive thing that you're doing. In fact, because the stats of your cards are so much larger than the reactive ones right now, you can hold these cards until turn 6, and if you expect me to Shang-Chi you, you can just play Armor on turn 6 instead and beat my reactive effect in your proactive deck. And I think that's where some of the issues come in with the way that cards are balanced right now. And the 2 biggest offenders, if you may have noticed from this conversation, are likely Armor and Cosmo. I don't think proactive cards can provide these reactive effects or these preliminary protections permanently or at the stat line they are currently being provided. We saw this with a card like Nova, which was adjusted to have a smaller body because, as Second Dinner said, the card had a powerful effect, the reason the majority of people were playing it, so it shouldn't have a similar sized body to other 1-cost cards. The same can be said for Cosmo and Armor. They've just been the best in slot cards for a very, very long time because they have very powerful, continuous effects and really relevant bodies, meaning that unfortunately, proactive cards seem to just be significantly more powerful in Marvel Snap right now than reactive ones. So how do we look to change that? Well, I think fundamentally it comes from these effects like Armor and Cosmo. We can possibly set rules in place in a number of different ways. We can follow Nova's example and have these cards be less proactive, so their bodies just aren't as good on rate. They don't provide anywhere near as many stats over the course of a game as they do currently. They can have 0 power or 1 power and be very, very serviceable effects. Alternatively, we can look at a card like Valkyrie, Shang-Chi, Enchantress that we were talking about as these reactive effects and see that they have one thing in common. These are all on-reveal effects, and a lot of the best reactive effects in the game are. Even if we look at a card like Arrow, for example, notoriously powerful right now and often the target of a lot of Nerf bat hate as well, this is another powerful reactive on-reveal that kind of falls into the same issues as Cosmo and Armor in the sense that it's massively overstated for an effect this strong. Arrow would win a lot of games if it still had 0 power, so why does it have 7? Which means, again, it just ends up being the best in-slot card a lot of time for interfering with your opponent's game plan while being a proactive card. So we want to try and remedy this. We can look to decrease stats, like we said, about Armor and Cosmo. Can apply that to Arrow as well. We can look to make all these effects on reveals, so in general, Cosmo and Armor are more reactive cards than they are proactive. If Cosmo only stopped on reveal effects until the end of the next turn, if Armor stopped anything being destroyed this turn, these would be effects that will reward you for being reactive, and protecting your cards, using them as one-shot bullets to keep your things safe and making them more of a traditional reactive effect instead of just being played out ahead of time and not giving up anything in exchange for that effect. And I think that might be something I would be eager to explore on cards that are providing protection or reacting to your opponent's play patterns in the near future. But I'm really eager to know what you think and what you feel about that thought process. I know this video has been a bit of a ramble. It's definitely been something a bit different. I've been kind of trying to formulate my thoughts on why we keep having so many people asking for very similar nerfs and very similar changes in Marvel Snap for the last few days. And I didn't really get it as ironed out as I'd like, but I didn't want to keep this topic in the back pocket forever, so do let me know what you think. I'm curious. Are we supposed to try and make sure cards are either reactive or proactive, or is there a fine mixture in the middle that is acceptable overall? Is cost reduction as much of a problem as I believe it is, or do you think it's fundamentally part of card games? I would be very eager to know. Until next time, I have been HowlingMines, this has been Marvel Snap Zone, and you've been amazing. Take care of yourself, have a good one, and I'll see you again very very, very soon.